In the fall of 1971, at an end-of-season lot clearance behind the Ridley Calhoun Canning Company on a red dirt lane just outside of Musella, in Crawford County, Georgia, a 31-year-old woman named Della Faye Renfro paid $11 for the right to haul away a full season's worth of bruised, softened, downgraded peaches that the cannery had already condemned as unfit for the line. The fruit sat in 3 sun-warmed bins behind the loading dock, dented and weeping and drawing flies, stacked and forgotten between the scale house and the hog truck that came for it twice a week. The line foreman, a broad and impatient man named Harlan Dobbs, waved a hand at the bins the way a man waves off a bad smell, and told her that cull fruit was cull fruit, that it bruised because it was soft, and it was soft because it was going over, and no packer in the county would put his name within a mile of it. The bookkeeper who counted out her change, a tired woman named Ada Sistrunk, wrote the words hog feed in the ledger beside the $11, because hog feed was the only category the plant's books had for whatever it was this woman thought she was buying. 2 men loading crates stopped to watch her back a borrowed farm truck up to the bins, and neither of them offered to help. But Della Faye Renfro had grown up cutting peaches at her mother's wood stove, 40 and 50 pounds at a sitting, and she knew a thing the cannery's grading table had never been built to measure. She knew that a peach bruises worst at the exact moment it is ripest, that the soft, dark give the sorters were trained to reject was the same give that meant the sugar had climbed all the way to the pit. She knew the cannery downgraded its sweetest fruit for the one flaw that made it sweet, that a peach a single day too soft for a shipping crate was a peach one perfect day into its life as a preserve. The men saw spoilage in those 3 bins. Della saw the ripest fruit in Crawford County, priced at nothing, because the only people looking at it were people paid to look for shipping flaws. That first fall, she hauled off a little over 400 pounds of condemned fruit and put up 212 jars of preserves on her own 4-burner kitchen stove, sitting at the table with a paring knife past midnight, cutting the bruises out 1 peach at a time. Her first 2 batches failed outright. The fruit was so ripe it ran thin as syrup and would not set, and she poured close to 30 ruined jars down the kitchen drain before she understood that she was fighting the very ripeness she had gone there to get. So she stopped trusting the sugar to carry it alone. She cut back to small 4-pound lots she could watch every minute. She added a handful of slightly underripe fruit to each kettle for the pectin it carried in its firmer flesh, and she wrote down, in a school notebook, the exact minute each batch came to a set. By spring, she had a preserve that held its shape on a spoon, and tasted, everyone who tried it agreed, like the best peach they had eaten all year. She sold it off a card table at the Musella Crossroads and out of the trunk of her Ford at the Mount Olive Baptist lot after Sunday service, 75 cents a jar, no label but a strip of masking tape with the date. The first 200 jars were gone before the orchards bloomed again, and a woman from the next county over drove 20 minutes to buy 4 more and asked, half joking, whether Della would ship. The second year taught her that a good product and a safe one were not the same thing. A hard late frost in April of 1973 killed most of the county's commercial bloom. The cannery ran short of fruit all season, and Harlan Dobbs, with no culls to spare and a line to feed, had nothing left over for a woman selling jam out of her trunk. Then the county extension agent, a careful and well-meaning man named Emmett Sears, stopped by her kitchen on other business, saw the open kettles and the hand-taped jars drying on dish towels along the counter, and told her plainly that she was wasting her time, that no grocery in Georgia would ever stock a preserve cooked in a home kitchen with no seal, no inspection, no lot number, and no way to prove what was in the jar. At the Musella feed store that same week, she overheard 2 men laughing about the Renfro woman and her bruised peach jam, and one of them, a fellow named Cordell Pruitt, called it garbage sold in a mason jar loud enough for her to hear. She did not argue with any of them. Instead, she drove the 90 miles to the State Department of Agriculture office in Macon, sat down with an inspector, and wrote out by hand exactly what a certified kitchen would require of her. Then she spent the next 8 months and very nearly all of her savings turning the old smokehouse behind the peach shed into a small inspected cannery, a stainless steel table, a proper double water bath line, a scale, a registered label, and a stamped lot number on the bottom of every single jar that left the building. She reopened in the spring of 1974 with a certified kitchen and a decision she had never made before. She would stop waiting on the Cannery's leftovers and start buying culls outright, at a price low enough that Ridley Calhoun was glad to be rid of them and high enough that Harlan Dobbs had to write her name in his book as a paying customer. She offered 2 cents a pound for condemned fruit. The cannery would otherwise pay the hog man to haul away. And in that first season under the new arrangement, she bought 11,000 pounds, better than 5 tons of peaches no one else in Crawford County would touch, for $220. From that fruit, she put up just under 4,000 jars, raised her price to $1.25, and began keeping a ledger every bit as careful as the cannery's own. The ledger is where her patience showed. She worked out that a case of 12 jars cost her about $3.40 in fruit, sugar, lids, and gas, and sold wholesale for $9. And she taught herself to think in cases instead of jars, and in seasons instead of weeks. She took on her first real account that August, a single independent grocery in Fort Valley run by a sharp, skeptical woman named Sylvia Prather, who agreed to shelve 2 cases on the strict condition that they sell within a month, or come straight back off the shelf. They sold in 9 days. Prather ordered 6 cases the next month, then 10, then asked whether Della could make a spiced peach and a peach and fig. And Della, who had been quietly testing exactly those 2 recipes at her own table for the better part of a year, told her she could have both by Friday. By 1976, she could no longer cut and cook and label and drive and sell all at once. And she brought in the first person who ever took the whole thing seriously without needing to be talked into it. Her sister's girl, a 19-year-old named Loretta Kyle, who had a head for figures and no wish to leave the county. Loretta took over the ledger, then the labeling, then within a season the buying itself. And it was Loretta who noticed that the culls ran cheapest and ripest in the last 10 days of each variety's window, and who began timing their biggest purchases to those short, predictable gaps. Between them, they pushed output to 14,000 jars in 1977, and just past 19,000 in 1978. Adding accounts, 1 careful store at a time, a co-op in Perry, 2 groceries in Macon, and a gift shop at the Big Highway Peach stand on Route 341 that sold their half-pint jars to summer tourists at nearly double the grocery price. There were still small failures, and she wrote every one of them down. In the summer of 1977, a Macon grocer named Wendell Faircloth returned half a case with mold blooming under the lids, and Della traced it to a bad run of seconds-grade lids she had bought to save $8, threw out the entire lot number rather than argue over it, and never bought a discount lid again. She learned to pull and inspect 1 jar from every batch after 30 days on her own shelf before a single case went out the door, and her returns, which had run near 2% that first wholesale year, fell under 0.5% and stayed there. By the end of 1978, she and Loretta were filling standing weekly orders, 8 cases to Prather in Fort Valley, 4 to the co-op in Perry, 6 split between the 2 Macon stores, and turning away a 4th grocery over in Warner Robins simply because the smokehouse could not yet cook fast enough to supply it. That fall, Loretta worked out that the 2 of them, running both kettles flat out through a long cutting day, could put up about 600 jars and no more, and rather than promise dates they could not keep, they started a waiting list of stores and worked down it, a case at a time. Still, almost no one in Musella understood what was going on behind the old smokehouse. To the town, she was simply the Renfro woman who bought spoiled fruit, and the label, she had named it 3 Bins Preserves, after the 3 bins behind the loading dock, meant nothing at all to the men out front of the feed store. She added a second water bath line and a used commercial steam cooker in 1979, hired 2 women from church part-time through the summer cutting season, and by the end of that year, she was buying close to 40,000 pounds of condemned peaches a season from a cannery that had once given the same fruit to hogs, and turning all of it into 31,000 jars under a lot numbered, state-inspected, and very quietly growing label. The thing that finally made the wider world take notice was not anything Della did in the fall of 1900. And 80% of food writer for a regional magazine out of Atlanta came down through the peach country on an assignment about the collapse of the fresh shipping trade. Commodity peach prices had fallen hard that year, and the orchards that lived on shipping fresh fruit north were losing money on nearly every crate they packed. At the highway stand on 341, the writer tasted a half pint of 3 bins spiced peach, stopped, and asked the girl at the register who on earth had made it. The article that ran that winter was mostly a sad one, about failing orchards and mortgaged land. But it turned, near the very end, on the single grower in Crawford County who was quietly making more money from the fruit the shippers threw away than some of her neighbors were making from all the fruit they managed to sell. A specialty foods distributor in Atlanta named Royce Tapley, the same broker who, 4 years earlier, had told Della flatly over the telephone that there was no shelf anywhere in Georgia for bruised peach jam, read that article twice, drove down himself the following week, tasted the spiced peach and the peach and fig at her own kitchen table, and placed an opening order large enough to put the label into more than 40 stores across 3 states. By the close of 1982, 11 years, almost to the season, after she paid $11 for 3 bins of condemned fruit, 3 Bins Preserves was moving enough product through Tapley's accounts and her own that the label was bringing in $240,000 a year. Harlan Dobbs, the foreman who had waved her off his loading dock, was still running the Ridley Calhoun line the year the distributor's trucks began backing up to the plant for the very fruit it had spent a decade paying to haul away. He took in those days to telling anyone who would listen that he had always known that fruit was good, a claim that everyone who could still remember the 3 bins understood to be the exact opposite of what he had said with his own mouth in 1971. Emmett Sears, the extension agent who had promised her that no store would ever stock her preserves, came around slower and more honestly. He began sending the county's beginning food producers out to the old smokehouse to see for themselves how a small, certified kitchen was run. And once, standing in her doorway with his hat in his hands, he allowed that he had been right about the inspection and wrong about very nearly everything else, which was, coming from Emmett Sears, a considerable thing to say out loud. $11. 3 bins of bruised, softened, weeping peaches that the Cannery had already condemned as hog feed, that the foreman had waved away with the back of his hand, that the broker swore had no shelf anywhere in Georgia, that the whole town of Musella was flatly certain nobody would ever want. Nobody wanted them. In the hands of the woman nobody understood. She did not grow a single peach of her own. She did not save the failing orchards, or beat the falling market, or invent one thing the county had not already stacked behind a loading dock and left for the hogs. She only saw, in 3 bins of fruit thrown out for being too ripe, the one quality the grading table had never been built to measure: that a bruise on a peach is not the mark of what has gone wrong with it, but the mark of the exact moment it became worth the most. And that, in the end, is the difference between a person who throws away what is bruised and a person who stops to understand what the bruise was trying to tell her. Have you ever seen real worth in something everyone else was ready to throw away? Tell us, if you have, below.